we're talking a significant majority of young people voted for Trump. And I think part of that is just, yes, people like Charlie Kirk making it okay to speak up if you're a conservative. Those conservatives speak up, and it becomes very clear that the liberal and leftist students on campus don't have arguments, and then those kind of persuadable students hear both arguments or hear one set of arguments and realize the other side doesn't have any, or just, realize one side's getting bullied and say, all right, well, you know what? Maybe I shouldn't just go on with the sort of inertia of government good. Maybe I should have a little skepticism about taxes, and maybe I should ask some questions about abortion, issues like that.
Well, it's not sexy. I always say that, it's not. And I think traditionally for a long time, it just never is. I mean, people, it's like the Shane Gillis joke, no one ever came out of college and, wanted to be a dick or be a conservative, now I'm pissed or whatever, But I think, and it's, that's the stereotype, but in generalities, when it comes, you're conserving, you're traditional. Like when you're young, you want to make a difference too. That's always I got to find a cause. I got to, and
that's probably another component, because when you say that, I've always struggled with, do I call myself a conservative or not these last few years? Because what do I want to conserve? I don't want to conserve the Department of Labor. I don't want to conserve the Department of Education. I don't want to conserve Roe v. Wade. I don't want to conserve the FBI. I don't want to conserve 90% of what the status quo is. So I'm the radical change agent.
But you say traditions, though, then. You'd almost say traditional.
Right, you'd probably say,
Because that's, you think of the old, We Love America, USA, 4th of July, American Pie, that kind of stuff is what conservative, traditional, I'll say values, but you're right, because that word does get kind of construed of, what are you conserving? Because you used to want to conserve different things, but now those things have shifted to now it's where the conservatives but the Republicans
and simultaneously we will say the 1980s, for example. We will say Reagan was the paramount conservative in the United States, and we will simultaneously say Brezhnev was a conservative Soviet. There's no policy overlap between Brezhnev and Reagan. So how can we call them both conservative? And the reality is, Brezhnev was trying to maintain this communist order in the Soviet Union, and Reagan was, to the point you just made, trying to appeal back to older American traditions. He was trying to return us from the
70s or the 60s.
The 60s and 70s. Really, basically anything post Roosevelt. Anything Roosevelt, Truman on through Carter, he was trying to say, all right, we're going to basically eviscerate this.
And they say, so that's on the national scale. And I said, and it definitely, the winds had shifted, especially and you could feel it come the beginning of the year. And obviously everyone's revving up though, so that makes sense. So you're seeing the efforts being put in. But I think it's also, like I said, it never was like that. You go 10, 12 years ago, one, it was never as polarizing as it is today. In generalities, politics is very polarizing. So it wasn't nearly as polarizing as it was 12 years ago, because you could have conservative friends. You go to college, I remember having good youthful debates. And people were cool, let's go grab a beer. We're just having a beer, and everyone's cool, all right. It
wasn't existential.
It wasn't existential.
Politics was a separate thing.
Yeah, and most people didn't even talk. It was that's boring and stupid. Why do you want to?
Most people didn't want to engage in it at all.
So, but now it's completely taboo. You bring it, it starts decisive, or it's divisive completely. Starts putting fissures and everything.
Well, and I think there might be a degree of healthiness to that, in the sense that we became desensitized to just how badly we had fallen into a rut. That's what I always say. There's two kinds of conservatives in the Republican Party. There's the status quo conservatives, who I've kind of been describing that use of the word conservative. And then there's the conservatives who are that more traditional, almost libertarian in many regards, or they want radical change that brings us back to what we used to be.
I feel like the libertarian, that's that weird kind of, those two are coming together, and libertarians are, it's funny, you see them talk, it's just chaos. But then it has the
Libertarian Party is a mess.
It's a mess. But then people are like, well, this. And it's well, now you're leaning conservative, and the conservatives are leaning libertarian. So there's this weird, a lot of overlap.
It's called fusionism.
Yeah, the fusion,
And so that was really the term in the late 20th century. William F. Buckley, I think, is more or less seen as the architect of fusionism, where he was going to take the libertarian economic policies and couple them to the more traditional or conservative. I don't like the term social policy because I don't really, give me some examples of policies that aren't social. Like, I don't know what that means, but the moral agenda of the, and I don't think we should shy away from that word. Like these are moral conflicts. And so let's go ahead and say you have the economic component and the moral component. And fusionism brought those two together and said, okay, well, we're going to cut taxes, but we're also going to be pro-life and oppose abortion. And that synthesis is really what Reagan was able to play on bringing together those schools of thought to win in landslides that we haven't seen since.
Yeah. So. Well, I was saying, so that was the other thing that we're getting into. So the GOP, like I said, it doesn't, and you express this frustration, we'll get into it. So like nationally, people weren't exactly getting out, I don't say getting out the vote, but it didn't feel like a lot of inertia. Now take that to the Minnesota GOP, which I remember you telling me they don't even care. Like they're like, well, this is how we always done things. And I remember you telling me like, they're lost. Like, before the election, before before the big, obviously the national, but the local, it feels disheartening a little bit. Maybe there's more. It's more probably invigorated now, but it's
especially because so back in December we had our state central committee meeting, and that's where state central delegates elect the party leadership for the state of Minnesota. So the chair, the deputy chair, the secretary, treasurer. There might be another position that's not coming to me off the top of my head. And at the December state central meeting, the sitting chair was ousted and replaced by a new man named Alex Plekish, who's a retired Marine colonel. So, and then the deputy chair is also a retired Marine. So I am not a veteran, but we're getting back into your wheelhouse here with the way this is going. So, and that the ousted chair really had just a lot of missteps and did not seem to be great at handling conflict. And his from what I can tell, his approach to conflict was generally to try and avoid it. And that that led to people feeling left out of the loop. That led to some unresolved issues. That led to some heavy-handedness. And with all of those things combined, he was ultimately removed. So there's a bit of a spirit of renewal here in the Minnesota GOP, which has had, over the last 10 years, scandals, corruption, lost election after lost election. And now we have a new leader who's very, very sort of outside of the traditional leadership of. He's not a former state senator. He's not a former state house member. He doesn't come from that pedigree. Yeah. So he brings a different business-centered mindset. Very much, I'm sure he would consider himself kind of coming with that Trump flavor of like, I'm going to bring that pragmatic business sense. Yeah. Not, well, I know how to work in a legislature.
Yeah. And like you said, you're seeing the revival a little bit in the Minnesota, but even then, I remember your frustrations for the upcoming, like they're just not getting it out. That just feels like it's stale. It's old. It's like they're doing the old strategies. It doesn't work, but they're like, well, what was it? You were like, well, the conservatives, they'll go out and vote. It's like the old thing, like, don't worry about it. We'll get out and vote.
Very
specifically, just that mentality.
That was a conversation I had with a former gubernatorial candidate from 2022. And I asked him, I said, what are you going to do? So 2022, we've been through George Floyd. We had the riots. There was still, if you can remember all the way back 4 years ago or 3 years ago, there was still this sort of prevailing mindset that America's a white supremacist country. And I said to him, what are you going to do to break through to suburban women and get them to vote for you if you're the Republican nominee? And he said, they're just going to look at how bad crime is in the city and they're going to vote for me. I said, well, he's still thinking of suburban women as boomers.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that in a derogatory sense. I just mean he's thinking of that
age group.
That age demographic. Yeah. It's like, no, I'm 38. My generation are the soccer moms. And I'm telling you, I went to a Lutheran high school and a Baptist university, and I'm looking at the people who are ostensibly should be the conservative moms, and they are absolutely convinced that America is perpetrating a genocide. So they're not just going to say, well, I heard somebody's car got broken into at the grocery store. I guess I'll vote Republican now. They're thinking this is something where if they don't vote Democrat, they're complicit in a new Holocaust. So,
So that was like the frustrations they were dealing with.
That was the frustration I was dealing with then,
Yeah. But now it feels like it's maybe a little more momentum.
Yes. I'd say the the Capitol has been exhausted from that radical leftist.
Yeah. What's going on now? Because I follow a little bit now because I'm on X. But
Yeah.
like there's some of the Minnesota feed comes up and there's some issues with some stuff switch over. There's like weird stuff going on. There's like, is there some Democrat that's under like this got arrested for something or?
Okay, so there was a
I don't know. I said like I've just saw a little feed. I'm like, what?
Yeah, there was a Democrat legislator who last year got arrested for breaking into it was her stepmother or mother-in-law, I don't remember now, breaking into her house. She drove like 4 hours to get to the house. She was dressed all in like a black turtleneck and a balaclava and broke in and ended up getting arrested. But the Democrats wouldn't remove her because that would cost them a vote, and they didn't want to do that. And now she, I think, is facing trial now. And then what just happened recently in this most recent election is it turns out that the Democrat candidate in, I think it was District 40B, did not actually live in the district.
Oh, okay.
And I was just reading, I think the Star Tribune said something like he did not meet all residency requirements clearly or something like that. It was like, no, he didn't live there. This isn't something where, well, he moved in, he rented a place and then moved in one day after the cutoff where you have to be there. He didn't live there. Yeah. He rented an apartment. He didn't even get electricity turned on to it. He never went to it. It was obvious that he didn't live there. Mm-hmm. So a judge, I don't remember if he rescinded or just refused to issue him a election certification. And so now there's going to be a special election there, but the governor issued the writ of election before he was legally allowed to do so. So now the special election has been canceled, and they're going to reschedule a new special election. All of this while the Minnesota State House is tied 67-67 between Democrats and Republicans.
That's as of November, or that's...
Right. Yeah. Well, and so now it's actually 67-66 because that guy was not legally elected. So so Republicans have the advantage. Republicans therefore want to basically initiate the legislative session, put in their Speaker of the House, put in their leadership, and then start forming committees. And Democrats are boycotting, refusing to go to the Capitol building.
Okay, that's what it was. I saw that little tweet or whatever. It was like they refused to. I was like, I don't know what's going on, but I saw something.
In fact, they rather than be sworn in at the Capitol, which is what you're supposed to have happen, they found a retired Democrat judge and conducted a midnight ceremony away from the Capitol building, and then told everybody, well, secretly, we all swore ourselves in the other night. So, well, this is preposterous.
Yeah.
So
I think the national, everyone thinks it's weird, but sometimes you dive into like the local state, and it's like kind of off the rails. Like you got that like the Parks and Rec mentality, like goofiness of it all, and they're like, no, that's real. Like I talked to somebody, they're like, I was like, yeah, he works at Parks and Rec. We went to high school with him, Stephen Hart. And I was like, oh, is really? It like, okay. Yeah, he works for the Prior Lake Parks and Rec.
Oh, okay.
And it was, Prior Lake. And I was like, hey, how's everything going? He's like, oh, good. And I was like, oh, is it like the show? He's like, yeah. And like it wasn't like a joke. Like, oh, the show is fun. He's like, no. He's like, it is.
Yeah. I remember there was an episode of Parks and Rec where a lady comes in and talks to Ron, and she says, there are signs in the park that say, do not drink the sprinkler water. So I made sun tea with it, and now I have a urinary tract infection. And I have to say, just being involved in politics on any level, the emails and phone calls that I've gotten from people that are, I mean, that's not parody. That is the kind of thing that you get from people.